Let's sing together our theme song for the week. Everybody's singing nice and loud. I know not why. All week we've been talking about the importance of having our devotions. The whole spiritual ball game is about connecting with Jesus Christ as a friend. That's the whole thing. Bible study and prayer. Now, Morivenden used to talk about a three-legged stool, three essential components of the Christian's life. Bible study, prayer, and we've been talking about that all week. But then the third leg of the stool, he said, is witness or service, or actually not just having devotions in the morning, connecting with Christ, but then actually putting that relationship into practice, doing our devotions. James talked about this, chapter 1, verse 22. He says, "Do not merely listen to the word and deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word and does not do it is like the man who looks at his face in the mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But the man who intently looks into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues to do this, not forgetting what he has heard, but doing it, he will be blessed in what he does." The life of blessing comes in actually doing the Word of God. Now, I don't think anybody here would have a problem with that, right? And when Jesus says things like, "You can tell my authentic disciples because they love one another." Nobody would argue that as Christians we shouldn't be loving. The question is actually, will we do it, right? Will we actually leave this chapel and live loving lives? Do our devotions. It's like the old story, I'm sure you've heard it, the professor who was prone to preach unsolicited sermons to all of his neighbors. His favorite sermon to preach was, you gotta love kids. Never be impatient with kids. You never spank a child. Just love, love, love. Of course, he had no children of his own. One afternoon, he was standing by his handiwork of the day, which was this freshly poured cement driveway. Just then, a neighborhood kid came bouncing out of the neighborhood, races across the driveway, leaving deep imprints in the cement. The professor went ballistic. "You good-for-nothing little rascal, what are you thinking?" Just then, the neighbor pops his head up from behind the fence. You gotta love that kid. Love, love, love. To which the professor replied, "Well, I do love the kid in the abstract, but not in the concrete." We're great at loving in the abstract. We're good at doing our devotions in the abstract, but today I want to get just painstakingly concrete and give you 4 specific ways that you can be a doer of your devotions starting today. And you can put the word into practice. We'll look at 4 major themes through the book of James. First suggestion, you can start doing your devotions with your eyes. This might be called the ministry of just noticing needs of people all around you. If you just open your eyes, you'll see all kinds of opportunities to do a loving deed of kindness. Listen to how James puts it, chapter 2, verse 15. Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to him, "Go, I wish you well, keep warm and well fed," but does nothing about his physical needs, what good is it? Hey, if it wasn't so unspeakably tragic, it would almost be comical, the illustration that James uses. Can you imagine going up to somebody who's homeless, naked, hungry, saying, "Hey, how do you like my new threads that I just got at Nordstrom? You want to watch me eat Krispy Kremes?" That would be rude, would it not? And yet that's what James says. Who can look and see the needs if you call your name, if you go by the name Christian, if you call yourself a follower of Christ and not do something about it? Notice opportunities to do your devotions. I got a letter some years ago from my conference president at the time. It basically just said, "I noticed. I noticed an article that you had published in such and such a magazine. I noticed that the numbers, tithe and attendance and so on are looking really good in your church this year. I noticed this and I noticed that. Thank you. P.S. Enclosed, you will find a very small token of my appreciation." And sure enough, he had enclosed this crisp $5 bill. Isn't that classy? Not a lot of money, but imagine if all of you were to notice what I do. I'm kidding. I'm joking. Don't send me money. Unless you're like really spiritual or something, and then who am I to squelch the work of the Spirit? You can notice the needs. Maybe a new student on campus who just looks lost. And you can put your devotions into practice. Number 2, we can be doers of the word with our ears. This might be called the ministry of empathizing. Listen to James, chapter 1, verse 19. "My dear brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." Now, when James says we should be quick to listen, he's not just talking about hearing auditory sounds. He's talking about actually crawling into the skin of people and empathizing, feeling what they feel. Marion Runge has written a poem that I think James would really like. She writes, "If I could have just one wish, a temporary one, I would wish for a fruit basket upset of skin color and nationalities. Let those people who poke fun at ethnics feel the hurt of Polish jokes, black jokes, whitey jibes, slanty-eyed stories, and jokes about Jews. Let them be outcasts because they are different. Then when they return to their original color and nationality, they will express only kindness. If I could have one wish, just a temporary one, I would wish all skinny people to grow fat. Uncomfortably so. Gaining day after day, fighting back the tears as the pounds count up. Let them diet on rabbit food, low carbs, banana milk, grapefruit, or liquid diets. Let them leave the table with stomachs growling while others eat chocolate pie. Let them feel the hurt of mockery, snide remarks, fat jokes, laughter, and ridicule. Let them feel depressed as they struggle to lose 1 pound and gain 2 the next day. Let them feel hopeless, helpless, unloved, and unwanted as they go through life. Then, when they return to their normal size, they will be more sensitive to those who cry out inside. If I could have another wish, just a temporary one, I would turn the clock ahead for young people and make them old. let them hobble because of stiff joints. Let them walk a little slower and eat a little longer. Let them be lonely and shut in from the world, especially on holidays. Let them have only memories, but no love. Then, when they are young again, they will be more considerate of senior citizens. If I could have a wish, a permanent one, I would wish that everyone would practice the ministry of empathy. Then we would truly experience earth as it is in heaven. I promise you, if you pray, God, just help me today to practice the ministry of empathizing, He will show you all kinds of opportunities to reach out and start doing your devotions. With your eyes, notice the needs of people. With your ears, empathize with their hurts and their struggles. Third way, we can practice doing our devotions with our mouths. This might simply be called the ministry of blessing. James has a lot to say about the power of the tongue. He says, if any of you considers himself righteous and yet does not keep a tight rein on his tongue, he deceives himself and his religion is worthless. That's strong language, isn't it? If you can't keep a rein on your tongue, don't call yourself a follower of Christ. And it's James, of course, gives us wonderful metaphors of just the power of the tongue. He says it's like this rudder, so small compared to this huge cruise ship, and yet by that rudder, it controls the direction of this ship. He says the tongue, it's like a bit in the mouth of a horse. Something so small can control an animal so powerful. Or think about this, your tongue, the words you speak today, it's like a spark. One little spark can set thousands of acres of forest on fire, can do billions of dollars worth of damage. One little spark. That's the power of your words. The power to either destroy or to build up and to bless. Jane Van Leuven is a research analyst in Seattle, Washington. She's about my age, but she remembers back when she was a teenager. She writes, when I was 13, I figured that it would just be easier to drop dead. I didn't know that I had hit the customary angst of puberty. I thought that it was just me. Growing up in a family was like sharing a hotel with a few other guests that you rarely saw. My businessman father didn't have much interest in kids. He wanted to wait to see if any of us amounted to anything first. My attractive mother and her wardrobe lived in this social whirl. My older brother had his own life, and so I just hid out in my room and I read books, lots of books. Well, in 8th grade, what I had, brains, grades, leadership skills, didn't count anymore. Looks did. I was just this skinny kid with braces, zits, straight hair, a true plain Jane. My family's word for me was homely, and they used it a lot. My dad told me that I should learn to take a joke. And here she is, 40 plus years later, still remembering the sting of those words. The words you speak today can scar somebody for life. She goes on to tell of the time that she went to a concert by the world-renowned pianist Roger Williams. She said people went crazy for his music, and when he finished the concert, they demanded, with a standing ovation, an encore. And so he played an encore. And then they demanded another, and so he played another, and another, and another, until he had played an hour and a half of encores. Finally, he joked with the audience that night. He said, "I'm sorry, I don't know how to play any more music. That's my whole repertoire right there. I've played everything I know, but I'd love to meet all of you. If you want to make your way to the stage here, I'd be happy to sign an autograph and meet you." And so the long line that formed in the auditorium. Jane took her place in the back of the line, and after waiting well over an hour, finally it was her turn to shake the hand of this great pianist. When he saw Jane, he said to her, "Well, hello, pretty girl." She writes, "I was stunned. No one had ever called me pretty before. My mouth must have fallen open, because he laughed and said, "Yes, I do mean you, really." Then, with tears rushing to my eyes, I watched him sign my program and turned to greet others. That night, I went home, locked myself in my bathroom, and stared at myself in the mirror for the longest time. I practiced my smile and kept whispering the words to myself very softly. "Well, hello, pretty girl." "40 years later, she still remembers those words." You think about that. You can put your devotions into practice today by just speaking words of blessing. One more, we can be doers of the words with our hands. Chapter 1, verse 27. "Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress." This is pure religion. You might call this the ministry of just serving the orphans, serving the widows, serving the marginalized, serving the forgotten. You can be a doer of the word by just practicing ministry with your hands and serving people. Some years ago, I was out jogging early in the morning, happened by a school crossing, had an opportunity in that moment to practice my primary spiritual gift, which is eavesdropping. Listening in on a conversation between this boy who was planted in the middle of the crosswalk wearing this vest that looked about 10 sizes too big for him. He said to the girl passing in front of him, "Good morning, Jessica. Good morning, Matthew. How are you today?" He said, "I'm about to freeze to death." I loved her response. In fact, I turned around, ran home so I could write it down so I wouldn't forget it. When the boy said to her, "I'm about to freeze to death out here," she shrugged her shoulders and she said, "Oh, well, if you freeze to death, at least you'll die in the service." And I thought, that's how I want to die. Helping someone to cross the street, helping a little child, going on a quiet hour mission trip and working in an orphanage, or listening to a person who's going through a real difficult season, whatever it might look like. I hope that when I die, I'll die in the service, doing my devotions. Some years ago, I went to a play off-Broadway. It was opening weekend, a play called Tuesdays with Morrie. Well, you've probably read the book. The basic story is that of an up-and-coming sports reporter from Detroit, Mitch Albom, who reconnected with a former university professor of his when he saw this man Morrie being interviewed on a late-night news show. The professor's claim to fame is that he was dying of Lou Gehrig's disease. But he was dying with a sense of dignity, and that was newsworthy. And so Mitch decided every Tuesday he was going to fly from Detroit to Boston to sit at the bedside of this dying old man. Well, I loved the book, and so I was interested to see the stage adaptation of the book. We sat in the front row of the balcony. Below us, there was this sound, this noise that I asked my friend at first. We wondered if maybe it was a PA that wasn't set right or what it was. We didn't really know. Didn't think much about it until halfway through this monologue, Mitch, or the actor portraying Mitch Albom, just broke character. Now, at first, of course, I just thought that it was part of the whole play, but it didn't take us long to figure out, oh no, this was not scripted. He just broke character and shouted to an elderly woman sitting right below us, "Hey, hello, do you mind? We're trying to do a play here." All the house lights come on. This woman nervously says over the speakers, "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We will get this momentarily fixed. Don't worry about it. Please remain in your seat and stay calm." Now we could hear the dialogue between a security officer and this woman. He explains to her, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to leave because your hearing aid is squealing and it's bothering some of our other patrons." Woman sat there resolute. "I'm not going anywhere." Now people in the theater started yelling, "Get out of here, lady. We don't want you here. We don't want to listen to your hearing aid. Go, move." Finally, the officer, the security man, started to force her, physically remove her from her seat. She yanked her elbow away and said, "Don't you blankety blank lawyer, attorney, sue, don't, whoa." So he said, "Oh, that's fine, but we're not going to resume the play until you leave." "I'm not leaving." Finally, after about 10 minutes, arguing back and forth, people yelling the rudest things, she stood up and said, "Fine, but don't touch me. I'll leave." And she made her way slowly, ever so slowly, to the exit. As they did, people cheered. They jeered her, told her, "Don't come back." Then the lady over the speaker system said, "And now we will resume Tuesdays with Maury," which, of course, is a play about this old man who's losing some of his biological functions, and this young man who tries to convince him that, no, you're still a valuable human being. You still have so much to teach us, and you still have so much to offer. Just because you're losing some of your biological functions, that doesn't matter." When they finished, it was to an enthusiastic standing ovation. Everybody, so far as I could tell in the theater, stood. Everybody except me. I just sat there. Just my mind reeling in what just happened. I could not get over the irony of this whole deal. Here for nearly 2 hours, we sat and watched this performance of a play that's about how valuable elderly people are and how much they can give and how much they have to offer. And yet when we had the perfect opportunity right then, right there, to put the play into practice, we just missed it. In the end, it occurred to me, this is nothing but a professionally performed act. That's all it is. Because when we had an opportunity to put the act into action, we missed it. Well, I'm not an actor, and I'm not performing scripted lines. I really do believe that we have encountered the Spirit of the living God through His Word, as we always do when we have our devotions And he's calling all of us to now not just hear his word, but to start doing his word, to start doing our devotions. And we can start right now with our eyes through the ministry of noticing, with our ears, practice the ministry of empathizing, with our mouths, practice the ministry of blessing, and with our hands, serve until he comes. Amen.